Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Matt, and welcome to week 15 of the Language Learning Mastermind group. And if you're new here, this is basically a weekly series of videos where I talk about language learning, I talk about my own progress, we do reflections, and hopefully all this kind of combined together will keep you motivated with your language learning. It'll help you to make your language learning a little bit more efficient and overall to have more fun. So I will leave in the description the timestamps for each of these sections if you want to skip ahead or go to the parts that make sense for you. And so with all that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So I wanted to start off this week and talk about a challenge actually. And if you're open to it, I would like you to write a comment below and tell me how your language learning went this week, except I want you to write it in the language that you're learning. Now, I think that this might be a little bit intimidating. It's going to maybe be really hard or really easy depending on your skill level, but I want to challenge you. I want you to kind of get out of that comfort zone and really try to express yourself, but in that written format, because I think that sometimes, at least in kind of my own experience, you might be learning a language. Maybe you're looking at YouTube videos in that target language and you kind of feel like you want to write a comment in that language that you're learning, but you're really afraid of making mistakes. You're not comfortable maybe with your skill level. But I would challenge you to just tell me how your week went, but in the language that you're learning. And if you're at a very beginner skill level, like I'm not really great at the language that I'm learning right now, just write a sentence, right? Write a sentence about how your language learning went. If you can go longer, great. And if you're not comfortable with writing a comment, that's totally fine. Write it down on a piece of paper or in a Microsoft Word document, right? And just try to express how your week went with language learning, but in your target language. And you don't have to look up things on Google Translate. Just try to get the grammar right as best as you can, right? Don't worry about the mistakes. I just want you to try to work on that output and not just express it in English, but also, really express it in the target language that you're learning. And of course, if you want to also tell me about how your week went in English or another language or 3 languages or 5 languages, that's great too. But just a quick challenge this week, I think it might be fun and it might challenge you to be a little bit better at writing an output within your language learning. And so now I wanted to talk about my language learning progress for the week. And Russian is going really well. That's the language that I'm learning. And I'm already above my 7-hour goal for the week. I'm somewhere around 8 hours, I think. And it's just gone really well. It's kind of a nice continuation of the momentum from last week. I really focused in on vocabulary acquisition, learning new words, and strengthening the words that I already know. And of course, I also focused in on the other areas. The second, probably biggest area for me was listening practice. And there wasn't too much focus this week on grammar or reading. But I think I'm going to kind of mix that up and do more this coming week. And I actually spoke for the first time. It was just kind of some speaking practice to myself rather than with a conversation partner or something like that. But I kind of mentioned that last week that I wanted to start slowly inching my way into practicing speaking, and that went really well. So diving into each of the areas. So with vocabulary acquisition, it went really well. I'm very happy with the progress. It's just, it's a process to learn more and more words, right? It just takes time to get those words into a place where you're comfortable expressing them in conversation, as I kind of realized with my conversation practice this week. But not only that, though, it just takes time for you to just learn the words in of themselves, right? Or to get them at a very strong place. But I think that if you kind of manage your expectations and you just kind of stick with it and focus in on the process, things will go along nicely. You just have to kind of have that patience and stick with it. So overall, I'm really happy with my word acquisition progress and the strength of a lot of my words. What I try to do is I try not to get too upset about maybe the weakness of certain words, right? It's very easy at times to just feel like you're not making progress within vocabulary acquisition, where your vocabulary is just flat, right? But you just got to trust in that process that if you slowly continue to work on it, whether it's through flashcards or reading or whatever, you're going to get better at the language. It's going to be hard to get a sense of, you know, uh, how many words that you know at times, just because it's just so difficult to measure. But not only that, though, there might not be a noticeable difference at times, especially at the beginner level, between, knowing 1,500 words and 1,800 words, right? Maybe that really doesn't make the hugest difference within compelling content, but you just have to stick with it and really just kind of focus in on getting those high value words. And so vocabulary overall for me has gone really well. I've noticed that as I've been reading and listening to Russian content, I'm noticing more and more words in kind of that content. I'm noticing words that I have picked up, and even in the words that I have learned via reading, that is, continuing to just pop up again and again. So overall, I'm very happy with the progress. I am slowly seeing the work pay off, which is great. And it's very exciting just because I know that the more words that I learn, the more that I'm going to be able to enjoy compelling content, the more content I will have access to because my skill level will be higher and I'll be able to enjoy that content and use that content more effectively, whether it's through reading, listening, etc. So that's going really well. With listening, it's basically a continuation from the last couple of weeks where it is very difficult, but I am noticing a lot of words here and there throughout the listening that I am doing. And I'm also noticing some grammar as well. So I'm noticing some past tense within Russian. I'm noticing some irregular conjugations or conjugated verbs, things like that. Which is kind of really exciting because the listening content is slowly becoming less of a wall of sound and I'm understanding more of it. Now, it's still really hard, but it's going really nicely. And then in terms of the other two areas, reading wasn't too big of a focus this week. I did a little bit of it, and same with grammar, but I really want to kind of um, focus in on those a little bit more next week. With grammar, as I've kind of said multiple times in the past, it's just a slow process, right? It's just being exposed to these kind of concepts again and again, where you're just comfortable with the conjugations, you're comfortable with the case endings or whatever it is. And as I've been reading, for example, and even listening, I have kind of noticed, I guess, a stronger awareness of some of the grammar elements within the reading content or listening content. Where, for example, I'll be able to notice that that is, the dative case ending for something, or noticing some plurals here and there, or a certain conjugation. So my grammar kind of understanding is slowly kind of getting better within the context of enjoying compelling content, which I'm really happy about. And I'm excited to see kind of where that goes next. And then, kind of the last thing is I focused in on some speaking, just 15 minutes, just trying to talk about Russian just a little bit. And it was definitely difficult at times. I struggled to find the words that I wanted to. Um, I struggled just to find the words that I wanted to use. And in some cases, I know that I had learned the word that I wanted to say, but I just could not remember it. And that kind of goes into this kind of concept where you might have a very large passive vocabulary, but you have to move it into active. You have to be comfortable without putting the language, right? Obviously, learning words and getting better at grammar and all those things are going to help your speaking, but you also have that you just have to work on speaking in of itself. So that is something that I'm going to slowly be doing, just practicing a little bit of speaking here and there. It was a lot of fun, but very challenging, but I'm going to keep doing that and just see how it goes. And so overall, in conclusion, the week went really well with Russian, and I'm excited to kind of see what comes next. So, for this week, I wanted to talk about overcoming failure in language learning. And I think it's really important to try to not resist failure because you're going to face a lot of it within language learning. I think it's better to try to embrace it and change your perspective on failure because in the end of the day, it's just going to come at you. And if you're prepared for it, I think that you'll be able to deal with it a lot better and to just overall make more progress and to have more fun, right? Rather than kind of getting stuck on these negative emotions associated with it. So I think that in a lot of cases, people have a kind of a very limited experience with failure, especially at the beginning phase, depending on what they're doing. So in a lot of cases, maybe you're using a language learning app to learn the language initially, or maybe you've learned the language in school. And in my opinion, in kind of these environments, your experience with failure is very confined. So within a language learning app, maybe you're just learning some vocabulary words, some grammar here and there, but it's kind of keeping you within the confines of the app itself, right? Obviously, you might be missing some questions. You might struggle with a word here and there, but your failure is very limited, right? You are experiencing failure, but it's very limited. Same with maybe an environment like school, where, for example, you learn some vocabulary words, you take a quiz, maybe you miss some questions on the quiz, but you get an A on the quiz, right? Same with grammar, and you kind of get an A in the class, assuming you kind of put in all that work. But in a lot of cases, what I found is that when you kind of deviate from the kind of very structured path of the app or the school environment, it's very easy to be exposed to this very intense level of failure with compelling content or whatever it is. So, in a lot of cases, for example, someone might be learning a language for a while, they've been using an app, or they learned the language in school, and they want to practice speaking. And so then they try to practice speaking out in the real world, and it is super overwhelming and intimidating. And they have this kind of first big instance of failure where they are struggling to find the right words to say. They are struggling with the grammar. They're making a bunch of mistakes. They're speaking really slow. Maybe they're stuttering, and maybe the other person is correcting them a bunch, or they revert to English on them or some common language, and that can be very disappointing. All right, and this kind of big instance of failure, especially when you have this kind of you've been putting in all this time into the language learning process itself, all this time and energy, and it just seems like it was for nothing, right? You might also experience this with compelling content, where you've been learning a language for a while, maybe through a structured app or school or something like that, and you try to use Netflix for the first time, but it's super difficult and overwhelming. Or you try to practice learning a language and playing video games at the same time, or reading for the first time, and you're reading the text and you don't know what's going on. There's so many words out there that you don't know. There's a bunch of grammar that doesn't make any sense, and you're very disappointed and overwhelmed. And it's very easy in times like this to spiral downward and to just kind of get really stuck in on these negative emotions because you feel like you've lost all this time learning the language. Um, you put all this energy in and it was for nothing. And of course, it doesn't even have to be, you coming from a structured environment into compelling content, right? That's just one example. You could just be trying to use these things for the first time and you're just faced with a bunch of failure. But as I kind of said at the beginning, I think that one thing you want to do is really just kind of try to orient your mind to being okay with failure, to accepting it, and to not try to take your mistakes and your failures within language learning personally. I think that within language learning, there's just going to be a ton of it, right? There's going to be instances where you speak really well one day and then the next day you don't, or some reading content is very easy and then it's really difficult the next time. What I found is that as you continue to learn a language, you continue to get more and more humble with just how much there is to learn, how much you could get better at the language itself, right? Understanding some nuances with grammar or with words, and so when you kind of take that ego aspect away from things, right? You try to just try to take a step back and not take it personally and be okay and embrace these mistakes that you're going to make. I think it makes the process way more enjoyable. And I think that ultimately it gets you out of your own way and helps you to just kind of focus in on the language learning process itself, right? By accepting that compelling content is going to be difficult, that you might have this kind of goal and vision in your head about how well the speaking is going to go or the show is going to go, and trying to kind of separate that expectation with the possibility that things might be very difficult. I think that you're going to set yourself up for more success in the long term, right? Because what I found is that it's important to use compelling content, but it's still going to be difficult because it is compelling content, right? Content that's pretty much created for natives. So I think that it's good to set those expectations, but and try not to set to take things too personally within language learning. And I think that in some instances, it's about setting your expectations ahead of time to account for this. But in other points, I think you just have to face that negative emotion of failure, right? There's no way around it other than just kind of dealing with it, right? Of getting crushed by the difficult reading content, of getting crushed by the difficult audio content. But slowly over time, you build a resistance to the failure that you will face, whether it's through speaking, whether it's through lack of understanding of grammar concepts or whatever it is. And there's going to be times where you don't understand the grammar, and it's very easy to be frustrated, especially when you put in all this time and energy into language learning. But the way that I try to rephrase things is, hey, this is difficult right now, but slowly over time, I'm going to get better at this. If I continue to put in the work, if I continue to try to improve my methods or whatever it is, eventually I will become more and more comfortable with it. I will get it, and things will improve. And I think you need to have that reassurance within the uncertainty of the entire language learning process. Within language learning, there's a lot of nuances, I think, right? There's a lot of things that you just have to kind of learn through experience. And I think that this kind of nuance is not easily expressed through like a quick language learning video, or it's just not the most popular topic to talk about. But there's a lot of nuance within learning a language, right? Like, I'll give you a good example. Within goals within language learning, I think that goals are really good, but there are instances where goals can be, detrimental, right? Where you are getting super stressed out about goals, it's overwhelming, and the goal is not effective, right? There's this kind of nuance within how to set goals and make them effective for you. Maybe that's not the best example, but it's just what I'm trying to get across is that there's this kind of element of nuance within learning a language and just improving and dealing with failure. And I think the best way to do it is just to experience it and try to maintain a strong control of your mind, right? Really, I think it's very important to have emotional and mental discipline within your language learning, right? Because there are going to be days where you're disappointed, you're not motivated, you're struggling. And it's very important, in my opinion at least, and this is true even outside of language learning, to have that mental discipline to get your kind of emotions in check where maybe you're really freaking out that you're not getting the language learning content, you're really stressed out, you're very disappointed in yourself. You got to catch yourself and say, okay, I'm going to get this. I'm going to keep going and things are going to improve, right? Or really try to get yourself motivated, have that discipline emotionally or mentally to keep doing the language learning even when you don't want to trust in the process, to try to improve when things are not working. I think this is very important, that sometimes it's just not really expressed within language learning content, right? You want to have that discipline of your mind. You really want to protect your mind against those negative influences, those negative thoughts of failure, that you're not going to do it. And this is, like I said, true outside of language learning. The biggest thing that you want to protect in life, in my opinion, for yourself is your mind, right? Because your mind will allow you to overcome very challenging obstacles. It will allow you to overcome adversity, and it's very powerful. And if your mind is in a negative state where it's spiraling from failure, you're not operating at the best, and it's going to be difficult to get out of that situation. So really try to control your mind and and just go for it, right? Try to embrace the failure. And when you face those kind of negative emotions, just take a step back and just try to, you know, realize that you're going to face a lot of this and just to keep going. So I think it's very important to just kind of realize this going forward within language learning. It's not just a thing that beginners face. I think it's very easy to experience it in all stages of the language learning process, whether you're advanced, intermediate, beginner, etc. So when you're facing failure, embrace it and keep going and have control over your mind. So now I wanted to transition into our weekly reflection and ask you, how did your week go in language learning? What are three things that went really well, and what are three things that did not go so well? And I do this every week because I think it's important to take inventory on your language learning, right? Because if we know what we're doing right, if we know what we're doing wrong, we can kind of take that and move that forward into the future to make more progress, to have more fun, and to kind of overcome some of the challenges that we're facing, right? But we got to look at what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. And it doesn't have to be the super long process, right? It could be just 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or even longer if you really need to take a hard look at what you're doing. And you don't even have to do it every week. You could do it every month, ever so often, even every day. But I think the importance here is to just take a step back and reflect ever so often. So once again, what are three things that you've done really well and three things that did not go so well this week? So for example, for me, I'm very happy with my vocabulary progress. It's continuing to build nicely. And I'm also very happy with listening. Listening continues to build, and I'm very happy about that progress as well. And I'm glad that I started speaking. I'm going to slowly be building that up over the coming weeks, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So then three things that maybe didn't go so well for me is my grammar review wasn't that great. My reading wasn't as consistent as I would have liked. And I could have been a little bit more diligent with listening, and some times that I could have, done listening, right? I could have done listening more often, basically. And I would encourage you also to try to think of ways to, overcome those obstacles that you've been facing, right? So don't just identify the negative things. Try to come up with a strategy to make them better for the next week or the coming weeks, right? Because over the long term, if you improve your strategy or method, even if it's just 2% or 5%, it can add up a lot, especially when we talk about fluency or getting really good at a language taking so long. Those small improvements over the course of many weeks really adds up. So, for example, for me, with reading and grammar, I'm going to try to start off some of my language learning sessions with those activities, just so I can get back on track with being a lot more consistent with them. I'm going to leave some notes, for example, for myself on my computer to remind me to listen or do a language learning activity for 2 minutes or 5 minutes to kind of get some incremental review. So think of some things that you can do and really try to tackle those problems, right? And if you're doing things that really well, ask yourself how you can double down on those ideas and make even more progress, more momentum with those things. So I think it's important to just reflect and try to figure out what you can do right or better within your language learning. And I think the other thing to realize is that sometimes it's not about changing your method up every single week or optimizing it even further. Sometimes you just have to stick with it and to focus in on the learning, right? Sometimes it's more important not to reflect, but to really just focus in on the language learning process, right? To put more time into that versus thinking about how you could be better, right? There's a time and place for reflection, and there's a time and place to just do the language learning process itself. So I think it's really important to remember that. Sometimes with just thinking about how the week went, it's just a check just to make sure that you're on track, right? Just to take inventory about your motivation levels, right? To give yourself a pat on the back and some more confidence and positivity that you're on the right path with your language learning, right? And you're making progress, right? Sometimes I think the reflection is good for that, where it just gives you some reassurance and positivity moving forward to keep you more motivated, right? To keep you more driven to achieve your goals. And then at other times, it's good to try to change things up such that you can make more progress. But then at other times, you don't really want to reflect too much. You want to just focus in on the language learning itself. But I like to do it every single week, and especially if you haven't reflected in a while, I think that this exercise can really help you. So once again, I would ask you, try to think of those things that you're doing really well and what you're doing maybe not so great. And try, if you're really struggling with this, try to think about the major areas within language learning, right? Vocabulary acquisition, speaking, grammar, listening, reading. Try to tackle each of these areas and look at how could I be better at vocabulary? How could I be better at learning some of this grammar or speaking, right? And think of creative ways and strategies to get better. So if you're struggling with kind of identifying those positives or negatives, start from those kind of core ideas, whether it's vocabulary, listening, grammar, etc. And that's what I have for the week. So let me know what you think. If you're open to it, leave a comment below and let me know how your language learning is going this week, but in the target language that you're learning. I think this could be a really fun and interesting challenge. It's okay to make mistakes, but if you're open to it, definitely try that out. And if you're not open to leaving a comment, try to do it on your own, right? In a notebook, on your computer, because that way I think you can work on your output just a little bit and challenge yourself. And with all that being said, I will see you all in the next video. Take care.